I was wrong about the Garmin R10 launch monitor, and I need to make things right by sharing some surprising data with you, which may change the way you think about the R10. I know it's changed my mind. In my full review of the R10, I said I wasn't particularly impressed with its consistency when it comes to carry and direction yardages when compared to a top tracer driving range. I had a fair few comments suggesting that I hadn't set up or calibrated the R10 correctly, and I should compare the unit against a high-end launch monitor instead. So I took that feedback on board and I booked myself into a Trackman studio where I did two things. Firstly, I compared the results of the same shot using the £500 R10 against a £20,000 Trackman across the range of clubs in my bag. And secondly, I tested RCT balls to see whether they made the R10 more accurate when compared to regular golf balls. And the results genuinely blew me away, and I've changed my opinion of this budget launch monitor, which I'll share at the end. So now I need to put a humble pie in the oven, ready for the end of this video, and share the results with you. So let's get into it. Similar to my review video, I hit 5 shots with a lob wedge, a pitching wedge, a 7-iron, a 5-iron, and a driver. I set up the R10 in front of the Trackman, taking the time to line up the unit. There was 7 foot from the R10 to the ball, and then 9 feet from the ball to the screen. I made sure the R10 was on a flat surface, and I even recalibrated it via the settings in the app just before I started the test. First up, let's take a look at the data when using the regular golf balls. This table shows the carry and direction yardages of both the R10 and the Trackman for each shot, as well as the difference between the two launch monitors. Any differences less than 10 yards are marked as green, and any that are greater than 10 yards are marked as red. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of green on this table, meaning that the R10 estimated the carry and direction distances very closely to the Trackman for the vast majority of shots. It's not until the 5-iron and driver that we start to see some pretty big differences, with a 5-iron shot on the R10 showing us finishing 17 yards to the left, but the Trackman showing it finishing 12 yards to the right. But even so, these results are so much better than the ones I saw in my original review when comparing against a top tracer driving range. In that test, the R10 results were very inconsistent, leading me to doubt the accuracy of the entry-level launch monitor. But these results compared to the Trackman are a stark contrast. Even more impressive is how well the R10 measured club head speed. This is one of the few metrics the R10 actually records rather than just estimating. As you can see here, for 24 out of the 25 shots in this test, the R10 was within 3 miles per hour of the Trackman. However, when we look at the spin numbers, we begin to see a lot more red on the board. The green figures represent when the R10 spin rate was within 600 revolutions per minute of the Trackman, and red for when it goes beyond that tolerance. And unlike the yardages, which seem to struggle more with the 5-irons and drivers, the spin numbers were more inconsistent right across the bag. Now that is understandable given that the unit is now trying to measure spin rates in units in the thousands rather than club and ball speeds, which are units now no more than 200. What I find interesting is that despite the significant differences in spin numbers, the R10 still managed to be close in terms of carry and direction yardages, which I'd say the majority of golfers using the R10 will care more about. I know I do. Spin rate is an area that we should see improve results for the R10 when using RCT balls instead, as these will mean the R10 can actually measure the spin numbers of the ball rather than just estimate it. So I'll be sharing the results with the RCT balls in a moment. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that a Trackman is not 100% accurate when recording club and ball data and using that data to predict shot data. However, it's one of the most widely used and trusted launch monitors by club fitters, PGA professionals and tour pros. So I feel pretty happy using it as a benchmark for these tests. And if the R10 can consistently track close to the numbers of the Trackman, that's a pretty good result in my opinion. Now here comes the really interesting part. Not quite as interesting as my free monthly Golf Deals newsletter, which you can sign up for in the description below, but it is still really interesting. When using the RCT balls instead, some of the R10's data improved, but some of it actually got worse. Just to confirm, I did not change the environment or move the R10 whatsoever between these two tests. Comparing the spin rate between the R10 and the Trackman, you can see here, as you may expect, There's so much more green on this table compared to the shots that were hit with regular golf balls. 22 of the 25 shots from the R10 tracked within 600 RPM of the Trackman, and the majority of them were tracking incredibly close right across all of the irons, in the single or low double digits. It did still have a few problems with some of the driver shots, but as an entry-level launch monitor, I'm more than happy to accept that level of inconsistency. But surprisingly, the distance and direction of the shots with the RCT balls tracked worse with the R10 compared to those hit with the regular golf balls. You can see from the table a total of 7 shots with the RCT balls were more than 10 yards out compared to 5 with the regular golf balls. And while it was close, when comparing the average difference of all the shots, the RCT balls tracked slightly worse overall, but it was still very close. The RCT balls had an average deviation of 6 yards, while the regular golf balls had an average deviation of 5 yards. But if you remove the driver shots, which is the one that the RCT struggled with the most when it comes to tracking the distance and direction, then the results were the same. Both averaged 4 yards of deviation. I mean, I'm happy with either of those levels of deviation, but I find it surprising that when the R10 could measure the spin levels very accurately compared to the Trackman when using the RCT balls, it didn't result in any significant increase in accuracy or direction accuracy when compared to the Trackman. I think this speaks to the way Garmin's algorithm uses its measured data differently compared to the Trackman. These results seem to suggest that while the RCT balls will certainly mean you'll get more accurate spin numbers more consistently, that won't necessarily translate into more accurate shot data. So I say for the majority of golfers, using RCT balls with the R10 is far from essential. So what does all this data mean? Well, I think it means it's time for me to eat a whole bunch of humble pie and say I was wrong about the Garmin Approach R10, at least for the most part. I've now changed my mind on the unit, and in the right conditions, I think it actually has the ability to provide exceptional ball and club data recording, and can relatively consistently produce accurate shot data for its relatively low cost. I do still want to be clear though, this is an entry-level launch monitor, so it's not without its issues. Firstly, even from my test in pretty much perfect conditions with the RCT balls, you can see that it still struggled to consistently provide shot data on par with the Trackman when using the driver. And secondly, my original test at the top tracer range showed how sensitive the R10 can be as soon as the conditions start to deviate from what is ideal. If you're not planning to keep the R10 in place once you're happy with its indoor setup, but instead perhaps you're looking to use it in a net in your garden or down the driving range where you have to set it up every time, you might not be as happy with the results, especially as you work your way through the bag to your longer clubs. In various R10 forums, you still see new users regularly complaining of the R10 misreading shots or consistently being 10 to 30 yards shorter compared to what they were expecting. One of the potential solutions for the distance being way too short is to change the sea level in the settings to something ridiculously high. But we've seen here that the R10 is more than capable of tracking the distance of shots accurately when in the right conditions, aka when there's enough room to see the ball and the unit is aligned correctly. If you set your expectations correctly and you set up the unit properly, I think the Garmin R10 is a great bit of kit. But for many golfers, it won't be the cheap alternative unit that perhaps they were hoping for. You can't simply plonk the R10 down and expect it to produce relatively accurate shot data for any club in your bag if you don't set it up correctly. It probably won't be able to consistently give you the shot data for any of your clubs, let alone the longer ones. If you're looking to buy the Garmin R10, hopefully for less than retail price, then I've included any links down in the description below. And if you're curious as to why I wasn't the biggest fan of the Garmin R10 in the first place, then you can check out my full review and initial findings right here.